Well, hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Making Lean Fly podcast. And we've got a really exciting episode today. We're talking about talent development. I think, a subject that a lot of people maybe have an opinion on it, but we've luckily got really three experts on this today: Mona Balasubramanian, Anna Truscott-Smith, and Debbie Adams, who are going to help us to understand more about talent development. We've also got Adam Nicklin, one of our regular guests, one of my team members who has worked very, very hard on this and's got a lot of experience in a practical sense about how does talent development relate to your own team and how you can actually make them as successful as possible. And what I didn't mention was that Mona and Anna are actually joining us from Gallup, a leading expert in the globally around talent development. And, I'm really excited to hear their insights. So as always, we have an abstract for the episode. So what we've said is that talent development is a process by which we recruit the right person for the role, determine their strengths for the role, and support their development to be the best that they can. If we do this successfully and consistently across the organisation, it promotes improved job satisfaction, better engagement, and superior business performance. So in this episode, we speak to experts in this field to better understand what makes talent development a success. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our august guests. So first of all, Mona, welcome on the show. Could you give us a brief introduction, please?
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you for inviting us. We're excited to be here. I'm Mona. I work with Gallup as Associate Principal Partner, and I've been working with the London office of Gallup for the last 7 years. Really, Philip, what I do is help organizations, in this case, like GKN and a lot of others, ensuring that they have thriving workplace cultures. And, there are many, many ways to making that happen, one of which is, of course, a focus on talent. So I'm hoping to bring some of those insights for you today.
Thank you very much, Mona. And I love the way you describe it, thriving workplaces. I think that's what we could all really resonate with. All of us, I think, want to work in a thriving workplace. So thank you. And then welcome, Anna. Same to you. I'd love to hear an introduction.
Thank you very much. Like Mona said, we are very excited to be involved. Um, really passionate about helping people to be the best they can be in work. My background is I'm an occupational psychologist. I've worked with Gallup for 33 years. They hire really young. I'm going to throw that one in just in case. But the reality is, I think if we look at the engagement results that just came out from Gallup, only 10% of people in the working world in the UK are engaged. And I think that's sad. And that really we need to do more to set people up to thrive, to be the best they can be, and to have that knock on in their personal life. So anything we can do to help people be better is fabulous to me.
Oh, that's fantastic, Anna. And yeah, I do think it's a real shame if people aren't able to go to work and feel engaged. So yeah, I think it's an interesting problem statement, as us lean guys might say, that we want to try and solve. And then Debbie, welcome. It's great, always been great working with you. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. So yeah, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Adams. I work inside GKN Aerospace. I head up one of our centres of excellence as part of the HR function, looking after talent, management, leadership development, culture, diversity, inclusion, belonging. So quite a broad space, but actually all focused on making or helping us to make GKN Aerospace a great place to work. And I think that aligns beautifully to some of the things that Mona and Anna were just talking about. I quite often talk about a really simple concept about making us have more best days at work, or enabling us to have more best days at work. Because when we have those, we're more productive, we're more engaged, we're more committed, and things are just much happier, both from a work perspective and in a personal remit. So all of the kind of concepts that sit under my umbrella in the Centre of Excellence all play a part in that. And this overarching piece around talent management and talent development is key to that.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Debbie. And yeah, I know that the best day at work resonates with a number of our team. Adam will quite often, if he's had a really good time, he'll come back, he'll feed back in our daily management meeting. He'll say, "Hey, I had my best day at work this week."
Yeah.
I actually, I have to say, I was thinking this, that I've actually had the best week at work I've had in living memory this week. So it's not even a day, it's a week.
Wow.
Excellent. That's great. Well, Adam, you know, regular listeners will know you, but for those who don't, and yeah, give us a brief introduction, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So Adam Nicklin, part of Philip's Lean Centre of Excellence, GCAN veteran of 16 and a half years now. So I'm officially, I guess, a corporate dinosaur now. I finally reached that. I focus on enterprise excellence now in our team as we look to further deploy our lean operating model beyond the four walls of our factories, through our suppliers, to our suppliers, and in the benefit of our customers and our customers' customers, but also vertically, you know, getting more traction with great business functions, because we've all got problems to solve, and we've got a tool set that we can use to help with. Really looking forward about this discussion. As Philip said, I've been involved since the first session that we had in just behind Anna's head, floor 18, is it? Going on just before the pandemic. So looking forward to talking more about that.
Absolutely great. Well, I mean, hopefully the listeners have a really good understanding of the level of people that are on this podcast in terms of their authority to talk about this subject. So really looking forward to getting into the meat of this now. So I think what we'll start with is the first question. You know, let's answer that first one. What is talent development? So what is talent development? What does it mean to you, Anna?
I think we have to start with what's talent. And I think what we would say talent is, it's that reoccurring pattern of thought, feeling, and behavior. And I actually think, if I was to kind of simplify it, it's the things you can't help but do. So if someone's competitive, they're going to bet on two flies crawling up a wall. If somebody has got woo, they can't help but chat to people beside them on the plane. And I think we think of talent when we think of sports stars and when we think of musicians, but actually it's just as relevant in work to understand what are those reoccurring patterns and how can we develop it. And I think when we think of that development piece, it starts with who the person is and really understanding them and what they can't help but do, and understanding what they struggle with and how you can help them manage it. And I think if we get those pieces right, it's a starting point. And then the development piece is creating that awareness, setting them up with the right experiences, giving them those insights. But every time it has to be individualized, and it has to really start with the individual.
Oh, excellent. I really like that. And I love the way you've kind of put us to, well, let's understand what talent is first and foremost. So Mona, maybe you want to expand on that.
Absolutely. I think, Philip, what I'd add in specific is the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, talent development has got to be not only individualized, but also, as far as possible, role specific. So there isn't something, you know, there's no generic talent development. You're actually developing your talents to be successful and productive in a certain role. So I think that's kind of where it's the responsibility of the organization to guide individuals down that path, and that, you know, getting them to realize it. And of course, it's the individual's responsibility to make sure they do their bit, in making sure that they absorb all of the sort of programs, facilities given, to make that development a possibility. So that's really going to be my kind of add on from what Anna described. Individualized, certainly, but has to be role specific.
Oh, absolutely. No, I love that. So if we think about what Anna and Mona have just said there, as somebody who's responsible for building, I guess, the capability in the organisation, Debbie, why do we need talent development? What does it give us as a business?
So I think it gives us a degree of sustainability and security to ensure that we've got the right people in the right roles at the right time. And I know that kind of sentence is a bit of a cliche, but it's been around for a long time, and it's been around for a long time for a reason. One of the kind of more progressive lenses on that, I think, is talent for what? And I think Mona's just started to touch on that, because, you know, I can develop, you know, generic leadership programs or generic functional programs for our leaders, for our individual contributors across the organization. And we can focus on them as individuals, but we also have to focus on what we're developing them for. And that, for me, is where the whole talent management approach comes in, around succession planning, strategic workforce planning, and then that piece around plugging some of those gaps around talent development, talent learning and development.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's probably a theme we're going to talk about as we go through this episode, is that generic talent development versus really specific talent development. And yeah, I think we need to open up the what is talent a little bit more as well, because I think that's a really important element. So Adam, your involvement, as you say, it's been what, 3 years now, I guess. You've been involved in this. You were one of the team who started off the team leader, group leader, talent recruitment and development program that we started in GK Aerospace around let's ensure that we give people who are the right people for the team leader and group leader roles the right start, and then we have a way of progressing and supporting them throughout their development to be successful in that role. So what does it mean for you? What's been the impact on you as you've gone through that and you've learned from Gallup, you've worked with Debbie and other members of the HR team? What's that meant for you?
Well, firstly, let me say that my time in GKN has given me the chance to work with Gallup for several years now on different topics, starting with the Engage Me survey and Clifton Strengths, and what it's helped me to do is recognise that talent and the best person for the role, we're often misplaced in terms of what that means. So, for example, what we do as an organisation quite often, and many do, is that we make an assumption that perhaps the best accountant or the best machine operator is going to be the best successor to the department manager or team leader when they go. And there is some logic to that, because why wouldn't you want the best technical person to do that? But then you start thinking about, okay, what do we expect a leader to do? And then when you start to think about a leader to do is enabling a team to, do their job brilliantly, be successful and solve most of the problems themselves, then you start to look at those, those talents, those innate talents. And quite often we've been misplaced in making those decisions, to the extent that we are, many companies are guilty of actually overstressing their people by encouraging people to go for jobs that are not suited to them. So I think that's the thing that's really stood out for me as well. But also that the process made me realise that we also need to be open-minded as to the profile of the people that we choose. So not only do we do what I just talked about, there's a perception that you can only be a leader in an aerospace company if you've been a leader in an aerospace company. And that is also not the reality. And some of the real successes that we've had, as you say, through this program, has been that we've encouraged our recruitment teams and our sites to look wider than their normal pool. And we've had people with the right talent come from retail and other industries. And the caveat here is they need to be given the environment to succeed. But we have real good examples where they have succeeded. So for me, that I wouldn't have been able to articulate that 3 years ago. And for me, that makes a big difference.
Excellent. You've opened up a few things there, Adam, which we need to explore, I think. I think one of the first things is you use the term innate talent. Well, I think even for first speakers of English, that's probably not a terminology that's in their active vocabulary. And certainly for second speakers, it's probably even more alien. So, Anna, what do we mean by innate talent?
I think it's those pieces that you were born with and that you developed. And it's not just enough to be born with them. It's about how you then were able to use it, how you were encouraged. Was there a teacher or a parent setting you up in situations where you could do it and you could thrive in it? And I think there's always that, the nurture nature debate and how that plays out. And I'm not saying that one completely takes over from the other, because you can be born with these innate pieces, but if you never have it encouraged, it's like a muscle that's not been properly developed. You have to have those two pieces coming together. And I think when we look at people who are using those innate, those natural pieces of who they are, and they're allowed to do it in work, you then have those situations whereby you get in the state of flow, where you lose track of time and you're just enjoying what you're doing and you're loving when it plays out. And I think building on what Adam said, I think for too many people, management has been a reward rather than a responsibility. And I think that whole dynamic of when you become a manager, that looking after your people and taking them to that next step is so crucial that I think sometimes we just haven't put enough thought into, do these people naturally want their people to develop, to grow, to be the best they can be, to empower them? Or are they thinking, I'm just going to want them to do it exactly as I've done it every time in the past? And I think working with GK, and I think one of the things you guys have done brilliantly is really thinking about the size of your team and thinking about that respect for the individual. And I know that respect is a really big part of lean for the people, but I don't always think that's remembered. And I think if we can take that and remember it and figure out who people are and what they can't help but do, it makes a huge difference.
Brilliant. Yeah. I love that as well. Management has been a reward rather than a responsibility. I wrote that down quickly because I think that's a really nice statement. And I guess, many companies struggle with that, don't they? Because you have somebody who's been a fantastic contributor to the business. You want to be able to reward them, and generally the grading systems mean that the only way you can reward them is to make them a manager, and then you can pay them more and give them more benefits. I don't know whether they still do this, but I know many years ago Eastman Chemicals used to have a grading system that rewarded you for your technical capabilities separately from your leadership or managerial capabilities. So they actually had situations then, I don't know whether it still persists, but you could actually have the manager of a department who was a lower grade overall than the people who worked for them, because they would be a higher grade from a managerial perspective, but a lower grade from a technical perspective. And that was how they tried to balance out that individual contributor versus manager dichotomy or dilemma. So I guess that's something that probably most companies struggle with. What's your view on that, Mona? How can you kind of get people from thinking, or organizations from thinking, that the only way to reward somebody is to make them a manager?
It's a brilliant question, Philip. Now, we've done some projects with some organizations which is specifically around the topic of career pathing. And what we help them with doing is actually defining career tracks for individuals, growth paths, which are not necessarily just, like you said, the only path to growing is actually having people responsibilities. You need to have, in parallel, those career tracks which allow expertise or technical knowledge to be rewarded, respected just as much as people leadership capabilities. So I think that kind of an effort, a conscious effort, and it is going to involve a little bit of rethinking the organizational design, but I think this can actually be a very constructive way towards solving the issue here of this unfortunate perception that's created in a lot of people's minds about the only way I can grow is if I end up being a manager, end up being a leader of other people. So I think just creating that almost a sense of equality and respect, and the reward system for those individual contributor roles that matter to your business is going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in my the last job I had when I worked for Philips, I actually struggled in a couple of countries hiring people into well-graded individual contributor roles, but the kind of the cultural norm was that as you became more senior, you had people working for you. And I was told that one of the barriers to recruiting the best people into those roles was, they said, well, when they see their family or friends, they're going to say, well, how many people work for you? Right. So there was actually a cultural barrier to being a higher graded individual contributor, because it was like, oh, so you don't have people working for you. So you can't be that senior. So I guess there are some cultural elements to this as well. Okay, so if I'm not sure we've really answered the why do we need kind of talent selection, talent development fully. And one of the things that came to my mind, and I'm probably going to move us a little bit left field here, but I think, Anna, you talked about people getting promoted and maybe becoming a manager, and maybe that's not what they want to do. Now, it's probably a more derogatory way of looking at this. So I want to see if we can flip this to a more positive way. But, there's long been the Peter principle around. I think Lawrence J. Peter came up with this idea of the Peter principle. And it was basically roughly, that people get promoted to the level of their incompetence, which I think is quite a derogatory way of looking at it. And I guess what we're trying to do here is to try and avoid that. Debbie, how would you see this? How can we use a good talent development approach to ensure that people don't fall into that trap?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I mean, I think there's a couple of things that I would echo that some of the other guys have said on the call, which is, we have to not assume there is one path to career success. And there are technical frameworks, there are leadership frameworks, and you can be successful in either one of those. You can also be really successful if you move from one to the other and dot around. So I think one of the big messages for me is, tactical performance or delivery does not equal great leader in any way, shape or form. I think one of the things that we need to do, and we've been trying to do this in GKN, is to embed in our own internal culture that it's okay to take different paths. You don't have to go down that route. And I think one of the things that will help us immensely as an organisation is our rollout of a new competency framework. So it's not exclusively across all of the organisation at the moment. We're rolling it out function by function. But I think that will allow people to have greater visibility of the possibilities of how to grow their own career. And I think, Anna, you talked about it earlier about people taking responsibility for themselves. People have got, we can talk to people about their career development, but if you really don't want it or you're really not that committed to it, we're just wasting our time. We're wasting our breath. And I've seen this happen a lot. We put a lot of people through programs and give them resources. We give them opportunities, and they do nothing with it. And for me, that's really sad. But I think when we think about the talent, acquiring the right talent, for me, it's about taking us outside of our preconceived ideas around what talent is. And I think that all comes back to culture. It comes back to expectations. It comes back to, historical context. I think it's about breaking that mold and going, okay, so what does success look like in a role, and working back from there. And that's one of the things that I love about working with Gallup, is that that's kind of aligned to their mindset. And as such, they've got a load of products, tools, services that support that. And I think engagement, the Q12 survey, which is widely used across the globe, is one of those tools. And I think the other is this talent assessment piece. So what we mean by talent assessment is assessing people for their potential in terms of a future role. And as Mona said, you have to align it to a specific role. You can't just go, you've got potential to be the king. It's got to be very aligned to a specific role. And I think for those organisations that can truly embrace that concept of putting aside all of your preconceived ideas, your preconceived ways and methodologies of recruiting people, this could be a game changer for organisations.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Debbie. I think that kind of, Debbie's really allowed us to segue into that question then, Mona, around, what is selection by talent? What does that actually mean? How does that work?
Philip, when we think about selection, we typically focus on experience, like historical experience. We focus on things like skills. We focus on education. These are the kinds of criteria, hard criteria we tend to look at. But what we tend to forget sometimes is those innate behaviors or those innate, tendencies that we have that we can't help ourselves but do. And that's kind of what we mean when we say selection based on talent. How do we actually understand, define, measure, in a very scientific way, those innate tendencies where we know we're likely to be more successful than otherwise in a given role if we play to those talents, right? Those when we do more of those things that we can't help ourselves but do. So that's really what selection based on talent is meant to do. It's a scientific way of measuring those specific, those what we typically perceive as intangibles, related with our innate tendencies. And again, it doesn't mean that you either have talent or you don't have talents. Do you have the talent that's necessary for the given role for you to be successful in? That's what we're measuring here. And I just want to mention, when we think about this definition and the scientific basis of it, Philip, we think about, what is it that it's actually going to take for you to be successful in the role, right? What is high performance, or people who have high talent and thereby have high performance? What is it that we see within them? And so the basis of it is really the study of high performance, and what are the talents that it's taken to be able to achieve that. So we discriminate based on that high performance, but never based on demographics or anything like that. So the focus is to make sure that it's fair, it's unbiased, but at the same time focused on, what are those natural tendencies of individuals who tend to perform well in the role. Does this make sense, Philip? Did I answer your question to a good extent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just a follow-up question, though, Mona, might be, for the listeners who are still thinking this sounds quite abstract, what are some of the specific talents that you may be looking for in this kind of assessment?
So I'll give you a few examples. So Philip, let's say, we're looking for hiring someone into a frontline managerial position. Okay, in these roles, we would look at talents, talent dimensions such as motivation. How likely is this individual, able to be motivated to be able to achieve the goals that are defined in that role? And within that, we measure, their inner drive to be able to make that happen, and also their want to create almost a legacy of success. So not just the inner drive, but also, do they make visible the efforts that they're putting? Do they actually show the others around them that, hey, this is what I've actually managed to achieve? So that external kind of push, or the appreciation that they like to get, that drives them both internally and externally. We measure both of that as an example for you. In addition, we look at things like collaboration, but rather than it being soft and fluffy, we actually get into the depths of, does this individual actually like to work with others, right? Does this individual actually like to build relationships consciously? Do they take an individualized approach when it comes to recognizing people in their team, supporting individuals, communicating tough messages? These are the kinds of things we tend to measure, and there is actually, specific questions that allow us to be able to do this well.
Okay, excellent. And Anna, maybe moving on to you, how do you actually assess these talents with people? So if we have a candidate for a role, what's the mechanism by which you are able to assess these talents?
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Philip. There's two different styles. So if we're thinking about what we use for your group leader or your team leader, we have a web assessment, and there are two types of questions. One of them are very simply multiple choice. And so you have a statement, and then you have 4 choices where you can decide which best suits you. And the other one is we have a Likert scale. So we have basically how much you agree to disagree on that. Then on the in-depth interview, so for our leadership roles, it would actually have somebody phoning you up and asking an open-ended question and getting you to talk about how it plays out. In both of the cases, I think it's really key to say that every question we have comes from a database, because we like numbers and we're pretty obsessed with the numbers. So for every item, we can turn around and say, well, how does this one work? When we look at people who are exceptional in the role versus people that are average or below average. When we look at questions like, as Mona mentioned, how fair is the item? So are we finding that if we found that there's a demographic difference by culture, you mentioned culture earlier, we want to make sure that we're not discriminating on culture, gender, age, disability. So they always come back to that research up front about, does it tie back to performance? And then subsequently, can we measure it in the longer term? And really, we like to be able to get down to the nitty gritty of how is each individual performing. And when we look at that, we can see that there's a massive difference in terms of performance, in terms of retention, in terms of safety, in terms of profitability. And going back to what Adam said at the very beginning, impact on customers. So one of our clients we've been looking at recently, manufacturing, they're having a huge problem with waste. And what they found out is that is very much down to individuals and looking at the individual talent in terms of how that plays out. So it's asking the questions, making sure that people feel comfortable. I mean, I think when we're looking at anything that we do in any assessment, it has to be reliable, it has to be valid, it has to make sure that there is no bias, but we also want them to be candidate friendly. So there's no point in me asking you what's your favorite place to eat a burger if that feels like, why are they asking me that stupid question? It needs to be something that feels like it makes sense to the person, because we do ask people to rate it at the end of the day and ask them to say, well, how did this experience allow you to describe yourself? And what we want is for people to say, yeah, this is me, this is who I am. I don't know if that's right for the job or not, but I think it goes back to what Mona and Debbie were saying earlier. It's thinking very much everybody has talent, but how can we make sure that we set it up in the right place for it to really thrive?
Excellent. That's superb. I really like that. Again, I keep scribbling down things as all of you speak. I've never written so much on one of these podcasts. So let's go into the bit where we ask for a fun fact about yourself. So let's and as we always do, it's we're not trying to get you to completely open the kimono. We're just asking for a little bit of something that maybe your colleagues don't know about you. So Mona, can I start with you? What would you
Philip, this was my most dreaded question for today, but you know what? Because it makes me realize how much of a boring person I am. No, I'm kidding. But I think, Philip, maybe an interesting one that my colleagues may not know. So if I had not picked a career in the field that I'm in right now, which is to do with, research, people, culture, all of these areas, I would have actually ended up, being a theater artist, either a successful one or one struggling to make it in Broadway. That's really where I would have ended up. I love the performing arts. I don't know if I'm good or not. I mean, okay is what I'd label it as at singing and dancing and stuff like that. But really, that would have been my direction in life, Philip.
Oh wow! So that was really eye-opening, because I didn't know that about you. I've met you a few times and didn't know that about you. So that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Mona. And Anna, what about yourself?
So if I wasn't here right now with you on this, I would actually be in a class lifting weights. I have started lifting weights and I have joined Strong with Swan, and I lift weights a couple of times a week and I am really loving it. I never thought I would ever do this. This is definitely not me. And none of the people in Gallup probably know that I do it, but I really, really enjoy it.
Oh, bloody hell. We're going to have to start calling you Anna Schwarzenegger.
I'm nowhere near that yet.
So that was a nice surprise. And Debbie, what about yourself?
Well, like Mona, this is just like me going, I'm really boring. I have no idea. And I could come up with all sorts of tiny little things. Like there was a point where I decided that I was going to learn to ride a motorcycle because I love speed and I love noise. But I wasn't very good at it. So, when we talk about talent for what, then, I really didn't have the talent there. So I think the thing that I would share is that I've hit a certain age where I've realised that zest for life is as important as almost anything else that happens in our time on this earth, which all sounds very philosophical. And my best friend and I are spending this year and hopefully future years really just ticking off some things off our bucket list. So we've had some amazing experiences already. I had a trip to Iceland over the Christmas break, which was just beautiful. And for those of you that I might make a little bit envious now, my holiday in the summer with her is we're going on a yacht around the Bay of Naples. Now that all sounds very grand. It's not a super yacht. It's like a little yacht. So I'm not some celebrity Kim Kardashian, equivalent. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that, and I think it's really important to just stop for a minute sometimes and just go, this is important for me, and actually it will help me in the long run in work too. So that was my fun fact. It's not exactly fun fact, but something you might not know about me.
I think that's fantastic, Debbie, and I guess we all kind of hit that age of 35 when we start to think about things. So Yeah, absolutely. So great stuff. Adam, I'm not going to put you through it again because I've put you through it many times. So
Okay.
let's jump back into the subject. But thank you for sharing. That was great to hear those different things about you. I don't know how many people heard it, but Anna, you surprised me so much. I actually swore a little bit when I heard you say that.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So my apologies to the listeners.
Well, we haven't got a contract, Philip, so we can say what we like, can't we?
But if we move on back to the subject in hand, one of the things that I think was coming out, we've talked, I guess, it's implicit what the benefits for the business might be. Maybe we've not made it clear enough what's in it for me as an employee. So, Mona, what would you say? What's in it for me? Why should I want to be part of this kind of process, talent selection, talent development?
Philip, there's actually more in it for the employee than the organization, if I'm really honest with you. I think the deal is that if we design these programs right, and if we're thinking about talent development as we've spoken about it in this call, it is a process through which you're able to ensure that the people you select for a role, whether it's a selection or a development, to hire them to be promoted, whichever it is, are the individuals who are most likely to be successful in that role, right? So it's almost as if you are positioning yourself to get, the greatest sort of likelihood of being good at what you do, being able to grow, the right way. And of course, you're playing to your inner, sort of your innate tendencies, which means that you're not fighting to be someone else. It means your well-being is likely to be a lot better in role. It means you're likely to be more engaged doing what you're doing. So really, at the end of the day, you are more productive. You are probably more happy as a result of, going through a process like this. And certainly you're more likely to be successful doing what you're doing. So, it's all of these good things that result in outcomes for the organization. It starts with the person.
Okay. So I guess the mutual benefit is that the organization gets somebody, we heard from Anna, I think, better retention, better performance, etc. But the individual themselves is going to get more fulfillment out of the role. They're going to be more successful. And if we feel more successful, then I guess, that's a win for everybody, isn't it?
It really is.
If I can just add to that, and I don't mean to interrupt, but we know that if you play to your strengths, you're 3 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life, and you're 6 times more likely to be engaged in your work. And I think people are very good at leaving work home behind them when they go to work, but it doesn't always work the other way. If we are not fulfilled and you're making the best of who you are, think of the knock-on effect it has with your family and your friends, and just your level of self-confidence. I think we don't always think about that. If you've had a great week, like Adam started off with, think of how he goes home. Think of how he interacts with his children. Think of how he interacts with his friends. It's a profound impact, and we can never underestimate this.
I can sum that up in 2 words: chippy tea on a Friday night. That's how good a week it's been, Anna.
Brilliant. So the kids were very happy, Adam. Although I must say, Anna, Adam did find it very difficult to stop bringing home to work because he's having an extension at the moment, and we heard nothing but his travails in that.
Yeah, that's why I came into the office today to avoid the noise and the banging as well, following the protocol, of course.
Absolutely. And I guess, Debbie, one of your responsibilities is to, again, work on developing our understanding in GK Aerospace around diversity, inclusivity, belonging. How can we be, a better organisation from that perspective? And we've been doing some great work with one of your team members, Simone Robinson, who's excellent, fantastic way of bringing it all across. And I think it's opened many of our eyes to this subject. How can this kind of talent selection help to ensure that we have a more diverse workforce?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Well, thank you for the compliment. Yes, Simone is really hitting the mark. She's making some great headway since joining the organisation, and it's brilliant to be able to have that dedicated focus around diversity, inclusion, belonging. One of the messages that she would specifically say if she was on here was, actually what we need to do is just build in inclusivity into everything that we do, and it isn't something, you know, separate that we should be, you know, ticking the box on. But I think what's beautiful about the work that we've been doing with Gallup is because it's so data driven, because it's so evidence driven, because it's so research driven, and it's about a specific role. There's no level of bias that can come into that selection process. So actually, if we're really smart about it and we take out some of those preconceived or traditional methods of screening CVs for qualifications, education, you know, skills, experience, tenure in a role, actually, and we just base it on the pure evidence from the assessment, actually that opens up the world to everybody that can possibly apply. And for some of our neurodiverse colleagues, you know, there are adjustments that can be made in terms of the assessment that they go through to help them to be equally successful, given that that might not be one of their biggest strengths. So for me, the pure nature that the way the tool is built allows for us to create a level of diversity. Certainly, I think the inclusivity piece is how we embrace those individuals when they come into the organisation. And Adam mentioned earlier, you know, if you bring in people to roles because of their potential to be successful in a role, you still have to enable them to be successful. So if you bring in somebody from a, you know, military background or a retail background, you're probably going to have a period of time which is slightly longer in terms of onboarding them and inducting them and getting them up to what I would call performing speed in comparison with somebody who's got manufacturing experience or aerospace experience. But the dividends come in the sense that they will just hit the ground running and keep growing and keep driving and keep motivating their people. Whereas the other way around, those with manufacturing, aerospace experience that don't necessarily show that potential tend to kind of plateau off. And it's those great leaders that we look to continue to drive that inclusive culture in the way that they behave with their teams. And there was a gentleman actually as part of our Black History Month. He wrote something in one of our articles on Aeronet, and he said he was taught by his father that he's not here. He's as a manufacturing engineer, he isn't here to build the parts. He's here to build the people that build the parts. And I think that's something that we all benefit from, taking a step back and going, if I can just take some breathing space and focus on the people will then focus on the product.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I love that. Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. So I guess as we're getting towards the end, there's a couple of things I still wanted to ask the question of, specifically to Mona and Anna, around, you know, if I'm a manager with many years of experience, are you really telling me a computer can select somebody better than I can? Mona, can we start with you?
You know, Philip, it's so funny because most fields of, you know, business, so whether it's operations where you guys are in, or finance or supply chain, people don't give it a second thought when you design processes, when you define work based on scientific methodology. They don't give it a second thought, right? In fact, that is the norm, that is the expectation. Yes, there's room for creativity, but that's kind of what people expect of you. So I find it really surprising when people get shocked when they see similar scientific approaches being adopted in HR processes. You know, if anything, I think that should help in building credibility. You know, we're moving away from just sort of the broad art behind HR and the creative aspects to actually bringing in something that is scientific, it's objective, it's unbiased, it's rigorous. So I think that's really where I'm hoping that, you know, we're able to bring managers on a journey to understand that this is actually an effort of us being able to show you how we can be more credible in the space of people.
Brilliant. That's excellent, Mona. And just kind of building on that, Anna, you know, bearing that in mind, but then what are the do's and don'ts of this process?
I think you've got to come into it with an open mind. And I think, what you were saying earlier is, that dynamic about the computer. I think people still like to hire on their gut and typically hire somebody who's like them. And I think if you're open enough to recognize that diversity that Debbie talked about and what they can bring, and how I love that example about building the people to build the parts. That's something that I've written down and I want to take with me. But I think you've got to start with, is what you're doing scientific? Is it objective? Is it doing the right things? And then longer term, can you measure the difference it makes? I think, most of what you're dealing with in is engineers, and I think they like numbers. And I think sometimes it's creating that case in point. But I think a lot of selection in the past has been really biased. It's been unfair. It's been finding people more like the people that are hiring themselves. And I think if you can stand back and be more tuned into people and think about it and think at it from a different angle, I think it makes a massive difference. And I think whatever you're doing for development, just make sure that it's real, because I think there's a lot of things out there that, are nice things to do, but they're not really going to give you that development that you really need objectively.
Excellent. No, I love that. Thank you. And I really love how much we've talked about people here. It's really about the people. So as we're closing off this episode, and I think I could go on for another half hour or so. I'm not sure if you could, but I think I could. As we close off, because we must. The last question I want to ask to you all, which is briefly, what advice would you give to anyone who wanted to make a breakthrough, make a difference, change how they do their talent selection and development? Debbie, can I start with you, please?
I'm glad you came to me first, because this is really simple and easy for me. I've used these tools in the past, and it's just a leap of faith. If you follow, if you use the tool the way it's intended to be used, and you follow the scientific, research-based results that you get back, you will get the right people into the roles. If you fudge it and you go, it's nearly right, I promise you it'll never work out in the long run. So I think it's just a leap of faith for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. Trust the process. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Mona?
I think my advice is more generally when planning and designing these kinds of programs, and that's to do with making sure there's room for change management in there. Like, don't assume that this is a process that, it's new, it's for the first time, and it's just going to land like that. It's going to take a lot of stakeholder management. It's going to take a lot of intentionality in explaining the kind of rigor that's gone into this and convincing individuals along the way. So I would say, plan a substantial amount of your time of that work towards change management.
Excellent. Thank you. Sage advice. Thank you, Mona. And then Anna.
I think going back to where we almost started from, I think it's about understanding the role and speaking to the stakeholders and really getting a good understanding. And also studying your best people. I think one of the ways to gain credibility is to study the best and learn what they have in common and what are the things that they can't help but do. We're not looking for everyone to be the same, but we are looking for some of those key pieces, like, as Mona mentioned, what's going to motivate them. When we think about, if I think about some of the leaders in your organization who are fantastic at developing people and empowering people and really setting people up to be successful, learning those things and helping them play out makes a huge difference.
Excellent. Yeah, great advice. Thank you, Mona. And then Adam, last but not least, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I think, firstly, what a great conversation. I think, firstly, I think as individuals or organisations, we need to recognise that we have a problem to solve in the first place, because if we don't, we'll never get there. I think we also need to address what our metric is, in the sense of, is the target to fill the role as fast as possible, or is it to hire the right person? And I think it's a combination of the two. And we spend too often hiring, and the goal is hiring the right, filling the role rather than hiring the right person. And also, as well, I don't want people to be put off by tools and processes and assessments. It's all eminently simple. It can be integrated to your talent acquisition team or individually. It's a modest cost for big payback as well. So I would say, for those pioneers out there, that want to make a breakthrough, just to have a read about it and try it. And of course, they can always reach out directly if they want to.
Great. Thanks very much, Adam. Well, great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, Debbie, Mona, Anna, and Adam. And the end of another great episode of the Making Lean Fly podcast. And to the listeners out there, remember, it's about changing how you lead, not who you are.